Yeah, you know what? It's our last garbage day together. I know. Happy garbage day
This
for the
fall.
last Tuesday. For this fall, that's right. For this fall.
For this semester.
Or this semester. I don't even know what month it is. I'm out of it. I do know though that it's time to play Let's Make a Deal. You want to play with me? I think you do. Okay, here's my deal. This is the university course evaluations. You got an email inviting you to participate in that, I think, last weekend or so. They are open until Saturday night. Currently, I have 5 out of 21 of you who've completed one. My deal is, as a class, if I can get you to 20 out of 21, actually, let's go 19. Let's go 19 out of 21, about the same percentage as the other class. Then everybody gets a point towards their final grade of extra credit. So convince your friends, your peers, to participate. And in addition, this afternoon, you will each get an individual invitation to complete a Qualtrics survey about further feedback about this class. And if you do that, you get another point individually, regardless of who else does it. And the way it works is that I feed it a list of your emails. It then tells me which emails completed a survey, but the responses are not tied together. And I never look at it until after I turn in grades because I don't want to see anything at that point, right? Just want to get through it. But I do really value your feedbacks, which is why I want to compensate you for the time and energy you spend in providing it, and I feel like extra credit is a fair way to do that. I want good response rates. That's what I want. Not necessarily good evaluations, but good response rates. I will say that, like last semester, I got some really good suggestions that led to the bridge activity creation. Like that's a brand new thing I'm trying out in this class. That was designed to help folks understand whether they were the only one who didn't understand something or not. Spoiler alert, you're not. That's never the case. And also just to have a sense of more practice, like in terms of like between the formative assessments and the homeworks, like something that would sort of head us that way. So we did some of the coding examples designed to fill in that gap. So I get really good ideas from folks, and so I want to hear them from you. So that's my deal, up to 2 points extra credit. The Qualtrics survey will last until the end of finals week, so that Friday night. So you've got a whole nother week to work on that. The university one closes on Saturday. And as you can see, I have the option to send a reminder. I don't know what it says, because when I click this button, it just goes. So it figures out who hasn't responded and sends you some kind of reminder. I will likely do that later this week, just in case, because I know things are busy right now, and it's easy to let little stuff slide. So, any questions on that? All right, we do have homework 5 in progress, the path model. A couple folks have already finished it, so it is doable. Vladimir and I, as usual, are happy to answer questions over office hours, email, etc. The other class just finished all their presentations today, so they will not be in office hours as much. So tomorrow should hopefully be a little bit quieter. And as usual, Vladimir is going to lead us through the bridge activity / formative assessment, whatever you want to call this thing. I had asked him to go through the path model questions first, and then we'll talk about the other ones. Do you want to stand up or sit down?
Stand up.
You want to stand up? Okay.
Yes.
Let me make sure you're in the frame, because you're taller than me. All right, there you go.
That's so beautiful.
Yep, Dan gave this to me.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Extra.
Yep, that's great. Hi everyone. Hi people on Zoom. I hope you are doing well today. Good to see you again. Happy Garbage Day.
That's right.
First time that I say that. Happy Garbage Day twice. So I hope you had a great weekend. We read your answers. So to this formative, bridge activity, we will have like 2 blocks. So first of all, we will cover questions 2 to 7, the multiple choice questions. So we will talk about the correct answers and some of the wrong answers, distractors, and then we will talk about question 1. And I prepared a file that can help us to talk about this, in which I will show you how the data should look like and some options for the models we have.
Nope, you're fine. My person.
Okay, so let's go with the first part first. For question 1, for a path model involving 6 outcome variables, which one of the following is correct about the total possible degrees of freedom? So here you can see that we have like 2 patterns or 2 options. One of them 27, which is correct, the other 21. Why do you think we have a difference of 6 between these two options, Mike?
The means weren't included in the second option.
Exactly. Yes. Maybe for those students who answered 21, they forgot the means. Remember in lecture 6, let me show you page 13 here. This is the formula that we have to calculate the total degrees of freedom in our model, in which V is the outcomes. So if we have 6 outcomes, 6 times 7, 42, over 2 is 21, plus 7, plus 6, is 27. Okay? So that's why, using that formula, here we know that the correct answer is 27, because we are looking for the total degrees of freedom in our model. Total means variances, covariances, means. Okay? Questions about that? Awesome. I'm reading Sharon Zoom 2, okay? Question 2. Given the same path model involving 6 outcome variables, a researcher specifies direct relations between all pairs of variables except for 4 of them. Now, what's the model degrees of freedom? We know here, well, again, we had 2 options. One of them is 4, the other is 14. I know that maybe for those who answered 14, they were calculating total degrees of freedom again. I think that if you use that formula with 4 outcomes, you should have 14. However, given that in this model right now, we are including everything except the 4 direct paths, the difference should be 4. Why 4? Because we are omitting, or we are not including, those 4 paths, the direct paths in our model. That's why the answer should be 4. Rebecca. Of course. Yes.
I think I was confused about what is the model degrees of freedom. But see, I put down, like, I thought the answer should be 24, which wasn't given, so then I just found it with the other options, which happened to be 14. But I was estimating, like, how many degrees of freedom total, and then it said except for 4 pairwise
Yes.
connections. So I was counting, okay, remove the 4, 27 minus 4 should be 23. But I don't think that's what model degrees of freedom means. So can you help me understand what are we calculating?
Yes. Yes, of course. So the question is, how can we get the total degrees of freedom and model degrees of freedom? So as you can see here, once we have the total degrees of freedom, that won't change. That number won't change in our model, because that depends on the number of outcomes we have. Given that we have 6 outcomes, we know that the total degrees of freedom would be 27. That's the total amount of degrees of freedom we have for those outcomes in our model. Now, given that that would be the data input in our model. Now, given that we will have a model output based on the number of parameters we are estimating or we are interested in question 2, we were omitting 4 direct paths. So this model output would be 27, which is the total degrees of freedom minus those 4 things that we are not including.
Okay, so
That's
data input is
total data input? Yes, exactly. Data input is total degrees of freedom, and that number won't change because that depends on the number of outcomes you have in your model. What will change can be the model output, because we can estimate or add different parameters in our model based on what we are looking for. So depending on these 2 values, you will have your model degrees of freedom.
And I didn't give model output. I gave it directly as number left over, which is the bottom.
Exactly, yes.
It's easier to count that way in a lot of path models, 'cause what's not here?
Agree. So that's why here we had 4 degrees of, that's why 4 is the model degrees of freedom, because we are not including 4 direct paths in our model and we are estimating everything else. Questions? Confirm your speaking language English.
So, since we've
Yes.
been talking about degrees of freedom is about the slopes used versus slopes left over. The model degrees of freedom is how many slopes are left over.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Slopes are covariances, so direct relations was the phrase I used on purpose to be ambiguous as to what, it could be either one.
Exactly. Leftovers is whatever you are not estimating in your model. Questions? Okay. Question 3. Well, 4, I think. If not all pairs of outcomes have direct relations in a path model, which of the following is true? So again, two options. Model is over-identified or model is under. Well, for those who responded under-identified, maybe they were thinking, they were flipping the meaning of over and under. So, over-identify, what's the meaning of that? Who can help me with that? We have something in the leftovers part, right? We could be estimating something else based on the parameters or the outcomes we have, but we are not doing that. So we have something else there. What happens when we have an under-identified model? What's the meaning? Sorry?
Have no slopes.
Yes, or you are
No,
estimating
you're
more
using
than you
Yeah, there's more than you have.
more than you have in your model. Okay, so these two states or outcomes will depend on the number of parameters you are estimating and the number of parameters available in your data or model, depending on the outcomes you have. Okay. Questions? How do you feel? Good. Awesome. Next question. Yes. Perfect. Why is this model just identified? To double check. Why this model is just identified?
All possible pairs.
Exactly. So we are estimating all the things that we have in our model, which means that, oh yeah, that's the next question. So in this case, we are just estimating all the things that we can in our model. So the model degrees of freedom equals 0, right? No difference between input and output. Next, if all direct relations are specified in a path model between all possible pairs of variables, which of the following is true? Again, two options. One of them, the model chi-square test statistic will be 0, or the model chi-square statistic will be non-significant and above 0. For those who answer first option, why this test statistic should be 0 or will be 0 for a just identified model?
If you are predicting with all your information, you can't be wrong.
Exactly.
You just can't.
Yes. So given that we are estimating everything, we are saturating our model. So we don't have room for mistakes here or errors. That's why when we saturate our model, or when we estimate everything that we have in our model, the chi-square test statistic will be 0, because we shouldn't have difference in terms of model fit between observed data and the model implied data. Now, in this case, how could we have that option, Lisa?
That would be indicative of good fit in an over-identified model.
Yes, but
You are off.
for this type of outcome or result, we should have an over-identified model. Yes, because we should have a difference in the test in the chi-square test statistic.
Room to be wrong.
Room to be wrong. Yes. Questions, Mike?
Could you have 0 with an over-identified model?
Oh,
Could you? Not saying you will. Could you?
maybe if both models are the same, even if the model is over-identified,
I'd say
fit could be the
theoretically
same.
yes, but really unlikely.
Very unlikely. But okay.
Yeah.
The expected value of a chi-square is its degrees of freedom. Is that right, or is it times 2? I'm trying to remember.
I think it's times 2.
Times 2. So, like if you have four things
Okay, yes.
I think it's times 2. I have to look it up, but I know it's a function of base 3.
Okay, next question. The idea, this is the last one. The idea of good absolute fit, indicated by our chi-square as RMR or the RMCA, in a path modeling context generally means what? And we have perfect responses here. So the model adequately reproduces the observed relations among the variables. That's true, and that's what we discussed in our last class. So we are just reproducing whatever we have in our data. And last year I heard this garbage in, garbage out. So that's an expression, and sometimes if you don't have something in your data, the model will be reproducing that. So not necessarily you can have strong relationships or weak relationships. You will have whatever you have in your data. Okay, based on this goodness of fit indicators. So that's the first half. How do you fit? How do you feel about this? Good. Awesome. Again, if you have questions, just raise your hand or say anything. Okay. Thank you, people on Zoom, for your reactions. So for question 1, here we had different answers. Thank you for taking the time to give us details. And honestly, this was a hard one to me.
A lot of good ideas, though.
Yes. Yes. So I was thinking about how to lead the discussion of this question. So what I did, I tried to create the data that we will be using for this example. Okay? So that can help us to think about this, and then we will cover some of the models that we think can help the researchers to answer their research questions. Do you want me to read question 1? Should I rephrase the example?
Give me a refresher with
Okay.
just to read through what the expectation.
Let's go. So here we know that some researchers have questions about how to analyze data related to a stoplight task with teenagers. So basically, each participant had to make a decision at 20 yellow lights. They can stop or they can go. So for those stops, we have some response time related to how much time it took to hit the brake. But when participants didn't stop, we didn't register any value because they didn't stop, so we didn't have a response time. Considering that data, we had 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, when predicting person-level summary outcomes, for instance, to capture person-to-person variability on task performance, well, that's the scenario 1, person-level summary. Second scenario is when predicting intersection-specific outcomes. Then what extra considerations would need to be addressed in scenario 2? So, what can we do? First things first, I think that given our example, the data will look like this. We have different participants, so we will have something like a subject ID, and then we will have 20 trials per person.
Can you zoom in that a little more, please?
Oh, yes, sorry. Can you see well?
It might be small on Zoom.
Let me this some. Can you see?
Yeah.
Well, awesome. So, sorry for that. Thank you, Lisa. So we have our subject ID. We will have as many IDs as participants we have. Then we will have 20 trials per person. However, then this variable here, RT underscore trial underscore break, is the response time in seconds. Okay? So you can see here that for the same person, we can have values, we can have missing data. So the numbers are the seconds that took to hit the brake at a given intersection. So here, for trial 1, it took, let's say, 2.3 seconds, and so on. These are missing data, so we have numbers of missing data. So then, related to scenario 1, it is important to mention too that for scenario 1, you should have something like this at the end. Because we were thinking, for instance, we can take the mean of response time across trials per person, right? This is like the person level summary. So for this person 1, we have these 20 trials, these 20 outcomes. So the mean of the response time would be this number. And we could use this as an outcome in our models, which means that per person, we will have one response time subject mean, which is this number. That's one thing. The other is that if we want to capture this idea of missing data, or if we want to analyze the differences between people who stop and people who went, who go, we can use counts too, for instance, because we will have 20 trials, which is the total number of trials, and we have the number of stops or the number of goes, depending on what you are interested in. So with these two variables, number of stops, for instance, and the average of response time across trials per person, we could fit two models from a univariate perspective or framework. So let's say that we are interested in the number of stops or the number of goes. But in that case, we can fit the binomial model. As we saw in lecture 3, if I'm not wrong? 4, in lecture 4. So let's say that we are interested in the number of stops. We know that we can use the number of stops to model the proportion of stops in our model. With a binomial model, binomial is the distribution, but I don't know
The binomial family, they talk about it.
binomial family models? Awesome. So that would be from a univariate perspective, in which case we know that we would be using a logit link function because we have two boundaries, given that we are working with proportions. And we could use a binomial or beta binomial or zero inflated binomial or zero inflated beta binomial distributions to fit these models. Now, the thing is, with respect to NAs, we are considering that as missing data, which is what they are. We are not like imputing data or assuming that response time in missing data are zeros, for instance. Something that people could do. If you look at these other options, someone could do something like this. We could replace NAs by zeros because we didn't register anything there, and we could compute new means trying to capture those NAs. But that's incorrect because missing data is missing data. We didn't have information about that. Okay? So, yes, and we don't have alternatives. Then, the second option we have for scenario 1 is we could use the response time, the average, across trials per person, and fit some kind of model using a gamma or log normal distribution. Do we have names for this? Continuous models. And in that case, our outcome would be the RT subject mean. And we know that we could use a log or an identity link functions depending on the conditional distribution, which could be gamma or log normal. And in that case, missing data will keep us missing data. We are not doing anything with that missing data. Now we have an alternative approach based on the shape of the distribution. If you see that this dependent variable, the RT means are like normally distributed, we could use the regular linear model to analyze this data. given that we will have a continuous outcome per subject, and that outcome would be normally distributed, or would be normally distributed enough. That's an alternative. So now, for scenario 2, we know that given that we are interested in between, sorry, it's not between. We are interested how to capture trial-specific variability within persons as well. And here I read many answers mentioning multi-level modeling, and when I was thinking about this exercise, that was my answer too. I was also thinking about multi-level modeling. However, we have an alternative based on what we have covered in this class from a multivariate framework in which we could use some kind of two-part model per trial. So in that case, we could use this structure, the long format, because we need 2 columns for that model. One of our models will be modeling the response time per trial, and the other will be modeling the missing indicator. This is a variable that I created based on the missing data. So this missing indicator, but this is the opposite. This is wrong.
You can say that's a stop.
Okay, yes.
What do you mean stop?
Yes, exactly. So with this variable, we are capturing information about, for each trial, we are capturing the response time or the stop. Well, the go in this case. Yeah, now it's weird. But this, if and yes, if and how long. Thank you. So doing that, using this two-part model per trial, in that case, we would have 2 variables, the missing indicator or the stop indicator plus the original response time for each trial, and we could use a logit plus an identity link functions, and then we will have a Bernoulli or normal distributions for the 2 models, because remember that we are using a 2-part model. And one of the sub-models will be modeling the extra zeros. The other will be modeling response time. That's why these models are if and how much. The if sub-model is modeling the extra zeros, and the how much sub-model is modeling response time. An alternative, we could use a gamma or log normal model, but that depends, I think, on zeros.
Well, it depends on what the response time part looks like.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. That's what I wanted to say. So please, if you have questions, let's talk about hard things, answering this question. And Lisa will help us to do that, because believe me, this took me time. This was a challenging task, but I like it because it helped me to realize that I was misinterpreting something. So please, if you feel in the same way, you can ask questions.
Any questions for him or me?
You can do it. Thank
I
you,
can do it.
Lisa.
Thank you. Appreciate the data example as usual. Yeah, he gets a round of applause. Go right ahead. Y'all can be supportive.
You can upload that file.
I can, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now I gotta get this back down. Short people land here.
You need a taller chair.
I know. I was so happy when I found this big chair, because that meant I could sit up here and like still sort of be like up, but also down at the same time. So this story is a true story, by the way. Several of you mentioned the possibility in scenario 2 of using either multi-level analysis or structural equation modeling, and since both of those classes are going to be offered in the fall, I thought I'd do a little foreshadowing as to how that might work. So the idea of, are the trials interchangeable? We've talked about that quite a bit in terms of binomial, and that made some of you uncomfortable to think, well, of course they're not going to be the same type of thing. It's going to depend on the characteristics of the intersection. Several of you even mentioned the possibility of using characteristics of the trials to predict differences between trials. So is it the first one or the 20th one? That will make a difference. Are they interchangeable in terms of the visual display or what the participant sees? Are some of them more ambiguous? You know, is the light that turns yellow, does it happen sooner or later? I don't have a lot of information about this task, but you can imagine situations in which you might want to do that. So there's an equivalence class between multi-level models and SEM that allows you to estimate separate means by each trial, and they can either be like, this is for trial 1, this is for trial 2, this is for trial 3, and that's what's known as a fixed effects model, in which case the trials would be considered nested in people. Alternatively, you can pretend like the trials are another dimension of random sampling, just like people are. And then you would have individual responses nested in trials, individual responses nested in people, and people and trials are actually crossed. Then you could put in predictors as to why some trials are more likely to have stops or to have longer response times. You can put in people predictors as to who is more likely to make the decision to stop rather than go, and to make that decision quickly or unquickly. So there's a lot of possibilities there. Let me pull up something real quick. I have a picture I want to show you. It'll just take me a second to find it. I got to remember what year this was.
So sorry.
Go ahead.
So the second option would be to treat the trials as a random effect,
Yep.
and then what?
So you can either treat trials as fixed, in which case you are letting each trial have its own characteristics, but you're not otherwise saying why they differ from each other in an explanatory way. Or you could estimate a random variance across trials so that you can put in trial level predictors to see which trials are different because of reasons. And this story came about from a student at Nebraska's master's thesis. So I was teaching a summer mini course on generalized models, and I started talking about the if and how much models, and he said, I think I can use this. And what came out of his mouth was the story that I just put in your thing. Because they were treating trials in which the person didn't stop as missing data. And that is the definition of missing, not at random, right? They're making decisions that are content relevant. So I helped him to set up a structural equation model as a two-part model for this task. Here's the path diagram for it. And so we abbreviated. In this case, we had 7 trials, I think, in his version of the task. I had said 20 in your guys's. So I have one latent variable here, so circles, things that are imaginary, unobserved, for one's propensity to make a decision of stop or go, as indicated by these binary outcomes right here. So this would be using a logit link in a Bernoulli distribution for this latent variable as a predictor of these 7 outcomes at the same time. And then the other one is on the trials in which they did decide to stop, so there is a response time, how long was it? And so then those go here, where it would be missing data for the ones in which there's no response time that's possible. And it turned out, as indicated by the solid path here versus the dashed, that his primary outcome as to whether the teenager had had sex yet was only predicted by the stop versus go variable and not how long. I'm sure there's some jokes to be made. I'm going to let that go for right now. The decision to stop or go maybe being a personality trait that operates in many areas of life. Let's just call it that. But I thought it was interesting that if he had analyzed the data in the way that his field typically did, which was not even to build a latent variable, but just to average the response times, he would have had nothing. So I thought that was an interesting example. By the way, this is also how you can abbreviate things in path diagrams that are going to have too many damn boxes. So there's another task that he had that was measuring executive function, the Tower of London, and it had 20 trials. And it ended up that a 2-factor model fit that. So this little dots in between the boxes is like abbreviating boxes 2 through 7 on this side, and then 10 through 19 on that side. So you can do cheating kinds of things like this to save yourself some room on these path diagrams. So this would be an example of a fixed effects approach, because each separate trial is getting its own slope, known as discrimination or a factor loading in SEM terms, and it's getting its own intercept or threshold. It'll be thresholds in M+ at least, and then intercepts down here. So this would be trials nested within people, in which we are using a latent variable to capture the relationship between the trials that came from the same person. So many of you mentioned this in your answers as well, that we have to worry about dependency. The trials are not randomly assigned to people. How we act in terms of our, sensation-seeking, reward-seeking, whatever the construct was, is going to then predict how we respond to these things. But the assumption of the model is that once we control for that, once we control for these individual differences, that the tasks are conditionally independent. And so that's why you don't see any directed arrows or paths among them. But we could add those if we needed them. So, true story. That's what I had envisioned as the solution to this, but a lot of you had other good ideas. I heard a little bit about survival analysis, a couple other things that crept up in there. So there's, I think, a lot of different things that could be done with this kind of data. The point that I wanted to leave you with is that if it's not applicable, it's not missing. Like there has to be a way to capture that. So we can do that with two-part models of various kinds within an SEM context or a multi-level context. And random effects and latent variables are the same thing, which is why I say there's an equivalency class between them. Yes?
My question is, I'm trying to understand what a latent variable is, and I think I've had trouble with it this whole time, but this example might be helping me get like a fuzzy glimmering of understanding. So in our data, like we have two observed variables. Did you stop or did you go? And then if you went, or if you stopped rather, when did you start stopping? So those are the things that we have observed data about.
Yes.
But if we posit an underlying variable behind both of them of like risk avoidance, that would be a latent variable.
Correct.
And that's the only way that you could really combine both of them.
Two different latent variables in that case. One for the stop decision and then one for the amount of time it took to make that decision.
Why are there two?
Because there's two outcomes. I mean, it's just what you said. Like we have these observed columns in the data. How long it took if they'd stopped. And then we don't know how long it would have taken if they went.
But I guess I'm thinking risk avoidance would be like column G, which combines them both, but just if you never stopped, it's a zero.
If you put in a zero, no. So like if you look at just even these two values, it's going to bias the mean lower. So it's going to look like you had made a decision in less time, like you're riskier, but you didn't stop at all, which means you're more risk. Like it's backwards, I think. I don't think you would want.
Switch our ones and zeros.
Yes, but in terms of these are not real zeros, and we can't treat them as such. They're missing. It didn't take someone 0 seconds to make a decision. They made a decision that did not involve a time. I'm trying. Point being, we wouldn't want to fill in zeros. That's what we wouldn't want to do.
There was nothing for us to measure the time
Yeah,
to do something.
it's not applicable.
There was no way to measure it. There was a way to measure braking time, but there's no way to measure thinking time because there's no thinking that you can say, oh, you saw the yellow light. You don't have a way to measure that time to say I measured yellow light to the time, I got to the intersection.
Yeah, we don't have a measure of that.
That's the biggest.
And by the way, anytime that you form an aggregate across trials or items or something, and then send that aggregate into some other model, you are assuming missing completely at random for what did not contribute to that aggregate, which is exactly what it sounds like, meaning there is no reason on earth why those values were missing. And that is just not going to be true, especially if people are more likely to stop at certain intersections than others, then it's related to characteristics of the task it's not missing. So using all of the trials and some kind of multivariate or multi-level analysis would help protect you against that, because then the assumption is it's missing at random, which means random after conditioning on the information that you have about the person. And that's much more reasonable, although it is not testable by definition. So there, all the different classes in one. How's that? So if you want to learn how to do some of this cool stuff, come back in the fall. You can take SEM with Jonathan, and you can take multi-level for cluster data with me.
And you'll have a joint project across this
Oh
campus.
no, we're not doing a collab. This is not like Mr. Beast and what's his face, the engineer guy who sells toys. Where is my son when I need him? Mark Rober. Thank you. Jeez. Anywho, famous YouTubers. Didn't need to know that. All right, questions on master's thesis.
So, just could you bring up the path model
I just closed it.
that you just closed? I'm sorry. But just thinking about it, is that something that we should be able to do at this point after completing this course?
No.
Thank you.
No, that's a structural equation model.
Okay, that's.
Yeah, so the addition of latent variables changes the story. And Rebecca, you know what a latent variable is if you know what a random intercept is.
I know that you've said that so many times.
It
but
is.
I don't understand what a random effect is, and I just don't understand what a latent variable is.
You know, it's funny because when Jonathan has conversations with like pure statisticians, like math stat, they don't believe in latent variables either. And then
It's not that I don't believe, I just don't understand it.
but then he says, but you're okay with mixed effects models, right? And random effects, they're like, of course, like, then you're okay with latent variables. They are the same thing. Essentially what's happening is that you're taking the pile of covariance among outcomes measured from the same person, you're drawing a circle around it and you're giving it a name.
So the latent variable of a random effect is this data came from Lisa.
Yeah.
This data came from Michael. So Michael is a latent effect.
Well, it's a like we can each have it's conceptualized as an individual difference that's continuous. So we each have a standing on some trait like reward seeking or whatever we're trying to measure with these items. And based on my pattern of performance, then we try to figure out what my most likely standing is on these traits in relation to the items, because items and people are supposed to be on the same metric. Now we're getting into IRT, which is, but yeah, random effects and latent variables are the same thing.
The elimination has yet to arrive.
Fair enough, fair enough. So how about we talk about some path models? Something you can reasonably expect to be able to finish by the time you end this class this week or next week. So I want to start, we talked about identification, we talked about how the model predicts relationships. And I think we made it through most of, did we make it through all of 5A?
We made it through the whole thing.
We made it through the whole thing?
Although I didn't see the video and I was looking for it.
I put up the video, didn't I?
Maybe I missed it.
Well, let me make sure that we get through the whole thing, because I think maybe we didn't get to the last model, if memory serves. I wanted to get through 6A, though. That one is, I do want to do today for sure.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but yeah, it says pick up where you left off, and that's here, so. Word knows where I left off, even if I don't.
Yay.
So the story that we were working with is predicting things from people's education levels. We had predicted it with dads only, and we estimated the model, realized that it did not fit very well. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was not as nice as we'd like it, and so we went looking to see what the problem was. So that was where we left off. So this set of output here, residuals for covariance, these are discrepancies. This is the difference between what the data say the relationship should be among your variables and what your model predicts it to be. And right now there's a big hole right here where there's a missing negative relationship between mom's education and dad's marital attitudes. So this tells us essentially why our model doesn't fit. It's called local misfit. And you can think of this as analogous to like looking at a child's report card. So let's say your child comes home with a report card where they have a B average. Are you going to get mad about that? Probably not if they're trying hard. But what if it was composed of 3 A's and 1 F?
That's alarming.
That's alarming. Now I would say, was it in art or in something that matters? And that's where people are going to boo me. Like, is it in science and math, or is it, PE, right? If he doesn't want to participate in PE and they fail him, I can live with that. But if it's something that he needs to learn for his future, then getting him a tutor or something would be the appropriate answer. So the same is true in model fit. Like, you can have an overall model that looks like it's a B average, but it could be because of like one big problem that you need to fix, or just a lot of misfit that's sort of all across the board. And so looking at these kinds of diagnostics can help you figure out why it doesn't fit and how it would be reasonable to make it fit better. So based on that, then we can change what's in the model. And so these statements down here, this is M plus output, but they all have these things. These are called modifications, indices. On statements are suggested slopes. So it's suggesting that mom ed predict dad marital. With statements are suggested covariances, so undirected relationships, and it's suggesting the same thing. So either one of these would remedy model fit. Given that we're thinking of education as predictors and attitudes as outcomes, I would do the first one. So that was the last model that I put in here, And this is actually something you could do in a univariate framework or in a path model. So I have the code in here in Stata and in R to do it in the packages that we've been playing with for multivariate data. And then we have the Stata version of it here where we've added mom's education as a predictor of kid and dad attitudes to keep it the same. So that was the new part of that. And now our fit is lovely. The other thing that I did was change it to robust maximum likelihood. So when you do that, you get two different columns of output. The first column, this is Levant output, assumes that you have perfect multivariate normality, and the second column doesn't. So if these diverge, you should be paying attention to the second one. And it looks like our test statistic now on 4 degrees of freedom is 1, a chi-square value of 1. And that is non-significant. Is that good news or bad news?
Good news.
Good news.
You don't want to be different than the best fit.
Yeah, we're not worse than the best fit model, which is just letting the data be whatever it wants, where we would directly estimate all the means, variances, and covariances, saturate it all out, have it be perfect fit. That's as tall as the data can be. This significance test is telling us that our data is non-significantly different than perfect. So that's what we want. And all the other indices, as I've noted here, CFI and TLI we want close to 1. TLI can actually go over, and it does. RMSEA we want close to 0. It is 0. So now it looks like all the problems that we had were fixed. This is Levant output. So it labels things for you, like the labels I added here show up in the output, which is kind of nice. The first column is unstandardized, and then the last column here is standardized. So you can have both in one table. M+ separates them in the two. And then here are all the covariances, intercepts, variances, and R-square. So now if we look at the same residual output, this is from Levant. The discrepancies are very minor. There's only a couple because we are missing relationships between kids' education and kids' gender on other outcomes. We already tested those and found that it didn't matter. So then this is the rest of what I would report about this, and here's the final picture that we end up with. So there, we did finish it. Questions? Want to see another example? The one that your homework's based on, maybe? Question?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering about the example that we already discussed in our bridge activity.
Yes.
So the 1 is the stop and the 0 is the time when there wasn't any decision that was taken by the driver and the driver went through the lights.
Yeah, they decided to go, so
Okay.
there's no response
So,
time.
so I'm trying to relate this with, I don't know if I'm going to make sense here or not, but I'm going to try. In terms of understanding second language learners' identity and the way that they're going to take a decision to participate in the classroom.
Okay.
Let's talk about this. So would I be able to measure the way the learner would, well, that's for sure that the student would like to participate. But if I see the person or the student who is not participating, will I be able to somehow measure, because this student might have some kind of an anxiety and there might be some kind of things going on in his or her mind. But then how would I see the stimulus for them to measure? And this is something that I'm trying to relate with the lights that were yellow and the driver went through. But wanted to take a decision, but wasn't measured at that time. So in the same way, this student here would like to take, or would like to participate, but couldn't because of a lot of emotional things, a lot of anxiety that might go on in the back of his mind. How can I measure that?
Okay, so let me make sure I can capture that for the recording. The question was trying to draw an analogy between the stop-go response time example given earlier and then maybe how that might play out with second language learners who maybe feel anxious and don't want to speak up because they're not sure they can speak what they want to say effectively. You'd have, like, in order to ascertain their reasons why, like, you'd have to give them measures. You'd have to either give them self-report measures about maybe public speaking anxiety in the context of second language. I'm assuming there has to be a scale to measure that by now.
Right.
General measures of anxiety. If you didn't trust them to be honest with you, then maybe you do some sort of observation. Maybe you count the number of times they, make gestures or do other things that show that they're nervous. In terms of the stop versus go, I think participation, you could think of it the same way, like, did they talk at all? Like, did they even try? And then if they did, like, how much did they say or how often did they say? Because talking at all would be like one level of outcome, and then extent of talking could be like the response time analogy to that.
Or how much
Right.
time between responses, like, which has a lot of cultural variables as well. How long do you wait after someone has finished talking before you decide to take a turn? But that
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can get at internal stuff unless you try to measure that directly, is I think the answer to that question. But I could see if you have the data, how
Yeah.
you could model it similarly. And maybe from an intervention standpoint, like if you can get people to talk at all, then that may be useful. Like targeting how much they talk may be too far.
Mhm. So I'm also thinking that the path modeling might be a good way to use this model in this situation. Would that work later on?
Yeah, path models can be used for a bunch of things. There are multi-level versions of path models as well. So like the 20 trials thing, for instance, that would be, if it were it would be conceptualized as like trials within people. So you would have like trial level relationships and then people level relationships at the same time.
Right.
So yeah,
Thank you.
sure. One of the things I do have a unit on in the clustered MLM class, because I couldn't figure out where else to stick it, is the tie between crossed random effects models and IRT models, particularly explanatory IRT models. So you will get a little bit of what we talked about in that class as one of the units, one of the shorter ones. Vladimir, question or comment?
Yeah, Lisa. Now that we are talking about the example again, for scenario 2, from a multimedia framework, how can we capture item-to-item variability or trial-to-trial variability with our model in which we are using two outcomes, let's say the missing indicator plus the original response time per trial? To me, that model at the end would give us, for instance, two intercepts, one for each variable. The missing indicator with a logistic binary regression and the intercept for the normal model, let's say, for response time. However, that intercept would be capturing the overall response time across trials for everyone. How can we capture in that model the item-to-item or trial-to-trial variability?
Okay, so the question was in a multivariate trial level analysis where we're trying to predict the response to each intersection, whether they went as a binary one, and then if they didn't go through it, how long it decided to stop.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I had conceptualized those as two different latent variables. And so there's like one set of outcomes that's tied to one, and you would have the expected logit of a decision like for each trial, and then you would have the expected response time for those that are eligible on the other one. So you have two approaches in thinking about how to model differences between trials. Was that the question? Making sure I'm following?
Yes, please. Yes.
One is to let them be what they are and not care why. So a fixed effects model, essentially, you would just say, here is the mean for this trial, this one, this one, this one, this one. And you let them differ. And they're separate fixed effects. And so in that case, there's no more variation across trials because you let each trial have its own version of an intercept and then potentially a slope as well. Alternatively, you don't do that. You treat differences across trials as a random effect that is crossed with people, and then you can put in reasons why some trials would be responded to differently than others. Maybe the first trials are different than the later trials. Maybe the ones involving, some kind of background scenery distracted the people more than the ones that were more boring. Like, I'm just making stuff up. But if you have reasons why trials are expected to be different, you can test those reasons as slopes in a model in which you're predicting trial level differences along with people level differences.
So in that second one, do you have two random effects?
Yes, you do. They're crossed. Two different level 2s in that scenario. That's explanatory item response theory, folks. All kinds of crossover events today. EIRTs, as they also call it. Yeah, and not this though. We're way off this topic, but I don't want to talk about mother's attitudes anymore, father's attitudes. We can talk about this one though. That work? So this is a true story. I told you a little bit about this story. Here's a paper about it. This is one of my colleagues at Nebraska when I was there in psychology. And she wanted to look at moderated mediation. There is such a thing as that, and there's also mediated moderation. This is the former. She wanted to understand how mindfulness and the relationship towards warmth towards feminists in college students, so this was a thermometer basically saying how much do you agree with various items measuring feminist attitudes. She wanted to understand how the connection between mindfulness and warmth towards feminists was mediated by these 4 variables involving different kinds of sexism. So this is a social psychologist looking at gender and equity issues. I don't remember the kinds of sexism, but I know that 2 of them are okay and 2 of them are bad. Like benevolent sexism is like when men open doors for women to be polite, it could be construed as sexist, like if you're not as able to open the door for yourself kind of thing. Like I know that those are example items. And the way that she originally conceptualized this was as a giant pile of regressions, where each of these 5 boxes was predicted by mindfulness, and then this box was predicted by these ones, and then we added in interaction terms with gender. So it was literally like 30 separate regression models that got reported, and the reviewers were like, oh my God, can you please just do a path analysis? I can't keep all this straight. So she came to me and said, how do I do that? And I said, like this. And it did not take her very long to get really good at it and run with it. So then we wrote this paper together about that in response to those reviewers, and I asked if I could use it for a class example, and she said yes. So that's the story. Now, is this model, here's one question, over-identified, just identified, or under-identified? If we just look at the picture.
It's over-identified because you haven't put arrows through it to everything.
Okay, we got 2 answers. And under-identified because the arrows don't go both ways.
Oh, I meant over-identified.
Yeah, so there's no arrows going this. Yeah, I do. So it looks like I have direct relations, so those can be covariances, which would be 2-headed arrows, or directed relations as slopes, from the x variable, so this is mediation terminology, to my 4 mediators, and then they have directed relations to y, as does x. So just looking at this picture, you would come to the conclusion that there's some stuff being left out among the 4 in the middle, and that it is over-identified, meaning we've overlooked some possible relations. However, residual covariances among the 4 mediators are not shown for diagram clarity. They are actually in the model. I just didn't put them in the picture.
So this is this was supposed to be a justified.
This is a just identified model.
Okay.
Yeah, it just doesn't look like it. So this is where you do have to make sure your table notes or your figure notes add in the proper context.
That makes a difference.
It does make a difference. Here are the data, essentially, that we're modeling. This is a correlation matrix in which one group, men, are reported above the diagonal, and then correlations for women in the sample are below. So this is a binary gender variable in a college sample. So we've got all my logic here as to why we're doing things the way we are. We're starting off with a model in which it's called a single group model. So men and women lumped together, just to see what the patterns are. So Stata folks, here's code that we looked at before. It is similar in the sense that we have constant predicting everything, meaning I'd like an intercept for each of these outcomes. I have mindfulness predicting y. I have mindfulness predicting all the mediators, and then I have all the mediators predicting y. So you can stack up variables, like these are a bunch of x's and 1 y. This is a bunch of y's and 1 x. So you can stack them up on either side of these arrows in M+ or in Stata to save yourself a little bit of typing. Now in this picture, mindfulness is playing the role of a predictor only. It's at the beginning of the chain, whereas the mediators are both predictors of y and they are outcomes with respect to x. So if I just set up the model this way, I cannot have missing data on x. It's a predictor. I can trick it, though, into letting me by turning it into an outcome. So this is a new piece of code that you will get a chance to practice in your last homework. This right here, that's the new piece. So I'm asking for mindfulness to get a mean and a variance. And Bladimir pointed this out to me the other day. It's means plural, but variance singular, for no reason whatsoever, just to drive people nuts. But what this is doing is saying, hey, bring this variable into the likelihood and essentially fit an empty model for it. When I wrote code that actually fits the empty model explicitly, it messed up all the R squares for reasons that are also unclear. So this is the workaround that Stata has in its capabilities. So once mindfulness is being treated as an outcome by estimating its mean or variance or both, then it can have missing data. Under an assumption of missing completely at random, but we're also assuming that it's normally distributed. And as you might imagine, the assumptions matter more to the extent that you have a lot of missing data. There's only maybe 5% missing or something on this, though. It was pretty minor. Then I'm asking for residual variances. That's the E part. This is a command that I found to cut down on some typing. Construct a list of variables and then comma unstructured. That means estimate all possible covariances between these. So I've got 4 variables in here that are going to do that. And by the way, everything I'm saying is in a comment out to the side, so you don't have to memorize what this code is doing. I did that for my own edification and for yours. All right. Building new things. This is a new command you haven't seen as well. NLCOM stands for nonlinear combination. I am multiplying paths. So this is taking whatever, like this path is going to be here, whatever number that's going to become, and multiplying it by this path, whatever number that's going to become. And that is creating what is known as an indirect effect in mediation terminology. The logic is that if there is a different relationship between X and Y after introducing the mediators, then you have some degree of mediation. The criteria is that it's different. Not that it becomes significant or non-significant, but just different before versus after including these. And it turns out that in this case, and in many others, multiplying these 2 paths together and testing the significance of that product is the test of mediation. It's the same, it works out to be mathematically the same thing as asking, did this path change after I put these in the model? So that's what we're doing here. I had to figure out what Stata labeled these paths first, and then I'm literally multiplying them together. That's what the stars are. So creating indirect effects for these things. And how I figured out what they were called is this coef legend command right here. Let's see, yeah. And then we can do total effects. Are total effects a thing in your guys' fields? Do you see this in journal articles with mediation, total effects? It's a thing that some fields really go with, and I don't understand it, but the way it's computed is literally the sum of all the direct effects and the indirect effects. And I don't see how that's useful, but people want to know it, so here's how you can make it. All right, here's how to do the exact same thing in Levant. So the stuff in parentheses, by the way, you don't technically need in this model, but we will need it forthcoming, so I put it in this one. These are labels. So x-intercept, x-variance, for instance, mediator 1, intercept and variance, so forth. Then we have squiggle. That means a slope. So y is on the left-hand side and x is on the right-hand side, so you can think of this like an equation. So then I have a comment here. This is the left side of the model, so mindfulness predicting each of the mediators. The right side of the model is warmth as the outcome of all 4 of my mediators, so you can stack them up like this with pluses in between. Squiggle squiggle is a covariance instead, and what it's a covariance of is intern with this, intern with this, intern with this. And then last but not least, indirect effects can be created by using these labels. So for instance, x to m1 is what I named this path right here. m1 to y is what I named this one. And so then to multiply them together, I create a new label for that, which I'm calling x to m1 to y. So that's the indirect effect through those variables, which is built from multiplying the 2 paths together. So we're making it do math.
Question.
Yeah.
Is there a limitation, or maybe I was just messing with all kinds, is there a limitation to the length of our variables in Levant?
I don't think so. But when you get to the output, it does truncate them. So like it starts squishing them together.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure like by what rules it is, because it's clearly dumping some characters
all kinds
out.
of weird stuff. And so like when I got to the output, like, oh, well, I'm just going to change all my stuff just to match the output just to make it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
whatever
don't
you-
think there's a requirement. I know in M plus it's 8 characters,
Right.
but I don't,
That's what
I
was
don't know about
wondering.
this. Vladimir, do you know, does Levon have any limitations on variable names, conventions, or
No.
labels? No? Okay. So yeah,
Okay.
I think it can be as long as you want it to be, but a lot of typing potentially.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. So here's a question. Test statistic 0. Expected or unexpected? Consequence or coincidence?
Covariance is in there, right?
Right,
So it's
covariance
just
is in there.
identified.
It's just identified, so I have a chi-square of 0. Is that surprising?
No.
Nope. You know what reviewer 2 had to say when we submitted this back? The articles should report fit statistics for their path model. Okay, here's your 0. It's perfect. Guess what this one is? It has to be 1. This one has to be 0 because it's perfect.
There's nothing to.
That's what just identified means.
There's no meaning to it.
There's no room to be wrong. We do not yet know if her hypothesis about how these things relate to each other is supported. What we know is that the model includes every possible relationship between each pair of variables, and therefore it cannot be wrong in recreating those relations.
So is it wrong to state in your article that our model was just identified, therefore there's no real meaning to the fit?
I think I said it's just identified and therefore fits perfectly.
Okay.
And like that's all you can say. Fit is not relevant
Right.
in this case, which is good because now we can just focus on what the relationships are. How predictive is this model? Like, what are the size of these slopes? What are the R-squares for these variables? Like, that is a whole separate conversation that we are now allowed to have because we have crossed the fit barrier, fit threshold. So good fit does not mean good results. It means you're allowed to look at them. And I gotta be honest with you, I am not a social psychologist, so these are what they are. Some things are related. So mindfulness is not related to warmth after controlling for a bunch of stuff. Mindfulness is positively related to internal whatever sexism, not related to external whatever sexism, negatively related to hostile sexism, and not related to benevolent sexism. So it's not, I mean, honestly, this is more complex because there's a lot going on at the same time, but you know how to do this. Each of these is just a standard linear regression model. Just lots of them at the same time. The parts that are a little bit different are covariances because we're not used to thinking about those. But these are undirected relationships that are scale dependent. If you want to convert them to correlations, that's the last column here for the standardized. So this is the parts of these variables that are left over after being predicted by mindfulness, how related those parts are. And this controls for the fact that these outcomes come from the same person, so they're probably going to be related. So we're modeling the dependency in this multivariate analysis by just letting the residuals correlate, the same way we did in univariate software for the family example. Intercepts, you know what these are, right? Expected outcomes when your predictors are 0, guess what? That's what they still are. There is a convention, by the way, the dot means it's actually predicted and it's an intercept. A lack of a dot means it's not. So because mindfulness at the beginning here did not have anything predicting it, this is its mean. It's not conditional on any predictors, whereas these are conditional on the predictors being 0. Same deal with the variances. Mindfulness, this is all the variance in mindfulness as an X predictor. These are the leftovers after controlling. And then here are the R-squares.
Just real quick, so the dot means it's predicted directly by the model?
Yes, it is being predicted as an outcome. It is an endogenous variable.
Oh, endogenous.
Yep, that's the magic word I try not to use. R-squares here are given for every variable except mindfulness. Why not? Cough, cough, homework question. Why don't I have an R-square for mindfulness as my X variable at the beginning of the chain? It's a predictor. Is anything predicting it? Nope. So what should it have an R-square of? 0. Yeah, mindfulness is essentially in an empty model being predicted by nothing.
So, question, and I just want to make sure I was observing correctly. If I'm wrong with my thought, please let me know. So if you would scroll up just a little bit. So on the variances on the far Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are those the proportion that is not predicted by it? And so then the 1 minus would give us our R squared values?
Yes, I'd have to double check that about the different standard, this one
No,
shouldn't matter,
yeah,
but that
just,
one,
yeah,
yeah.
just the far right, not the Levon one, just the one on the far right.
Yeah, so like external, it looks like all of its variance is unpredicted, which coincides with an R square of 0.
Okay, I just,
Yeah, I think they're telling you the reverse, but it's the same information.
yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly, otherwise, that could lead to issues.
Yes, yes. Yeah, these are unstandardized. This is the amount of variance left over. Like if the variable were standardized, this is the portion that's left over. And you can see this model ain't great. But fit isn't the reason. It fits perfectly and it sucks at the same time. Both of those can be true. Yay! But we haven't got to the interesting part of the story yet, which is whether these patterns differ between men and women, but that will have to wait till Thursday.
Oh.
I know. Spoiler alert, they do, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten it published. We can do some moderated mediation. All right, and then here's M plus for the same process here with lots of code to add labels. All right, questions before we break for the day? Yes?
So you are kind to repeat the advantage of saturating our model?
To me, the advantage of saturating a path model such as this one, let me go back up to the picture. So adding in the 2-headed arrows among the 4 in the middle, is that then you don't have to worry about misfit in terms of interpreting your results. Because if your model doesn't fit, if it doesn't adequately recreate the relationships among your variables, the paths that you do have aren't going to be right. They're going to be biased by what's not in there. Because it's estimating this path assuming that there's no relation here, but if there really is one, then this path should probably be different. And if it fits perfectly, you don't have to worry about that. And then I also think, like, if the story is, this mediator is not predicted by mindfulness, leave the path in and say that. I don't think it helps to take it out and have the reader guess, like, what it could have been. Just leave it in and say, these paths were significant, these ones weren't, here are the effect sizes. That is my perspective when it comes to path modeling. I have a very different perspective when it comes to structural equation modeling with latent variables, where the point is to establish the dimensionality through acceptable fit. Different answer for a different class. Okay. All right, then let us know if you need anything. Hope to see you all Thursday. Please start working on your course evaluations. Help themselves out. Bye for now.
Okay.
Bye,
And
Zoomers.
And you're sending us a link to your qual